Okay, this one won't be a long one, and that's also because the chapter is really short. So, again, keeping with the whole fan fiction thing, chapters vary widely from like how much is in them to how much isn't, and that's pretty much what we're dealing with here. So this was an incredibly short chapter, but it was all about this nightmare and then a letter. So James has a nightmare that like he can see like Abby in a field, and then she's like being she's like falling into this thing, like this big pit, and like she's screaming, and he's trying to get to her, and there's like all these weird machines that are like grabbing people and tearing up the earth and kind of like destroying everything, and it's all symbolism towards like change and the inevitable destruction and all this other stuff. It's very, very dark and emo. Again, I get it. It's honestly, if this was something I was reading 10 years prior to this would be the kind of thing where I'm just like, it's super pretentious and all this other shit, and just getting really mad about it. But now, like, reading this and knowing all this stuff about, like, just emo everything, it's just like, oh, you're adorable. It's like, you high school kids, you think you know the world. You have no fucking idea. It's cute. Anyway, so he has this whole like nightmare where like he can't get to her, and then he's like all freaked out, and he wakes up and he's like, I have to write this letter, and I want to read parts of this letter to you for this particular little podcast. It's a lot of stuff like when I look in your eyes, I at times feel a level of sadness I've never felt, as if we, despite barely knowing each other, have been apart for far too long. It's all like that. It's very dramatic. And again, knowing what I know and who I used to know, like when I was much younger, who were all into that scene and everything, this would have been the kind of thing to make me be like, this is pretentious and narcissistic and all that other shit. Now this is just adorable. This is just this is just, golly gosh, you're a deep and nuanced little fella there, ain't you, buddy? Oh, you know all about the hurt and pain of the world there, my 17-year-old friend. It's really cute. It's like those live journal posts or like Tumblr posts where it's just like, nobody truly understands my pain, and it's like, what is your pain? Nobody understands me, and I'm 17. It's like, I'm 33 and an alcoholic. You don't know what pain is. Fuck off. So it's like, you're not at that level yet. You're not at the level where you're just like, oh god, we're all gonna fucking die. And you start having like connections where it's like nobody knows what the fuck they're doing. Everything's just on fire all the time. And yeah, so this whole thing where it's just like, nobody understands my true feelings, and I can't put them into words because feelings are hard to feel. And it's like, you're just the cutest little thing. I just want to hug you. It's just painfully adorable and how nuanced it is. It's just so, oh gosh. So he writes this very dramatic email. It's all about, it's like, I've ached for you, yet I haven't heard listening to your voice, I've ached for you, yet haven't heard in a lifetime. It also, the grammar and spelling mistakes, which other reviewers have pointed out, they are there. But again, because I'm seeing this through the lens of like fan fiction, they don't bother me as much. Because I've read some truly horribly misspelled ones. This is nothing. If you don't have to interpret the words based on context, because that's how badly misspelled they are, you're not dealing with anything that bad. Believe me, it gets far fucking worse. So, it's a lot of very, like, dramatic stuff, and then he gets a phone call, since he wrote this really dramatic letter, and he sent it to her email, and Can you still call it a letter if you're writing someone an email? That's just me being nitpicky. It really doesn't matter, honestly. He can call it whatever he wants to fucking call it. He can say that he sent her an electronic scroll if he wants to. It really doesn't fucking matter. But he gets this phone call, and she's like, hey, can you meet me at the Quick Shop? And I had two things go through my head, which have nothing to do with this book and nothing to do with Onision. So one of them was Quick Shop. I immediately thought CWC Shop, and I was just like, is Sonichu going to be here? And then, of course, the next one was I reread it again, because I read it stupidly the first time and read it stupidly again, and thought Quick Stop, as in next to RST Video, and I was like, look, if Jay and Silent Bob had like a random cameo, that might make this book amazing, but that's not what this is. And, and he's just like, oh, did you see my email? And it's like, no, why didn't you just call? Valid point. And he's like, it's hard to say, I had to find the words. Also, valid point. And it's like, oh, well, then I'll read it and then I'll head over. And, yeah, okay. So, he's just kind of like hanging there, like he goes there and he like waits and she's not there, so then he calls her and he thought, he kind of feels like he ruined everything because she doesn't answer the phone and she doesn't show up. And again, we have that same moment from the other chapter. Literally, I think it was 1 chapter ago. No, 2 chapters ago. We're on the 3rd chapter. We're not even that far in, but we have another moment where he's just like, I guess she only saw me as a friend. Well, I guess I fucking blew it. I went too deep too fast and tried to, be like, hey, I have all these feels to feel for you. And she's just like, hey, no. And again, that's actually not that invalid of a fucking feeling to have. He literally does not know this girl that well, so whenever he's just like, I guess I fucked up, it's like, nah, I could see that. But again, this is also for, like, moving the plot forward, so that's not gonna happen, like, that it's gonna eventually be, like, she actually likes him or whatever. But in the moment, if you were reading this as if it were posted on, like, a fanfiction website, this would be posted, and then maybe, like, a few days or weeks later, we would get chapter 4, so you'd have all this time to, like, speculate on, like, how these things work. Because a lot of these people who do this will write chapter per chapter instead of writing the whole thing out and then publishing each bit or publishing the whole thing in one go. And they kind of just build immediately and kind of go very train of thought. So it's a bit like watching, like, a television series that you don't know what's going to happen until, like, the next week. And that's basically the writing that I'm feeling from this. I feel like that's what a lot of this is. I don't feel like Greg sat down and wrote the whole thing from one end to the other in the span of, like, 1 or 2 or 3 sessions, that he sat down and did this whole thing. And not that every writer can do that. Some books are so fucking huge, there's no possible way you could do that. But I don't feel like there was an overview kind of thought out. I don't feel like it was like, to take, like, Lord of the Rings, for example. There's kind of an overview, an overarching thing that you can kind of see what's going to happen. Yes, it leads into, like, 2 other books, but we're going with just the first one, just Fellowship, where it's just like, okay, well, there's Shire, and there's these hobbits, and there's going to be the other ring, and it gets there because of stuff that happened in another story. Now, well, Frodo's got the ring, and Gandalf's like, I'm gonna talk to these people, and we'll let you know, and then you have to go on a journey, and we have to decide what to do, and then we're gonna go on this big journey to get rid of the thing, and that's basically the overarch. There's a lot of other things that happen, but basically it's just, they're gonna go on a journey. We need to set up how and where they go, and everything that happens in between there that may change the path or alter this or do this, that we can establish. But we need to have the kind of, like, what is point A and what is point B. And then we'll move from there. And a lot of fan fiction stuff, especially how this is written, does not have that. It is not specifically planned point A to point B. The only overarch that we can kind of assess is that James and Abby they're gonna hook up. They're gonna be like a totes cute emo couple, And that's it. That's the basic thing. Now, how does this happen? Is there a problem? What does the hardship they face? That wasn't a proper sentence. We don't know, because it's not really thought out. And it kind of feels that way. And this is not... I mean, there's a lot of things that I could, personally and with a lot of other experience take, stabs at Onision for, but this isn't about that. This is about the book. This is not a thing that I would fault him for necessarily, because Greg is not a professional writer. Again, he didn't go to college for shit like this. And that's not a bad thing. You don't necessarily have to spend your whole life in school, to chase a passion. And that's pretty much what this is. It feels like a passion project, which is fine. And if he did, as a lot of exposure comes when it comes to amateurish writing, especially, in the internet age, involve things like blog posts, fan fiction, and things like that, then that totally does measure out. That does, it would make sense to me that he would think that. Because that would be kind of, his main exposure to this kind of, amateur writing scene, to kind of, grow from there. So it's not necessarily the worst thing I've ever read. I will say that when compared to other fan fictions I have read, it's definitely spelled better. It's definitely excited. Certain ones can get incredibly stale. And we don't have the plague of the songfic. So that's a phrase that I realize that some of you may not know, so I'm just going to explain that briefly. So songfic is basically the biggest cop-out I've ever fucking seen in writing anything. And a lot of fanfiction writers started doing this around the time of basically when this kind of stuff would come out. Instead of writing whole things, they would leeway into some moment where a character or characters has to have some sort of musical talent. And there's nothing wrong with having your story about, being about a musician or musicians or whatever. But then they would write out, lyrics. Just big thing of lyrics. And they would do that because it would pad out the page length. So the more word count in your story, again, if we go back to fanfiction.net as an example, they count how many words, what your character is, how many characters or whatever is in your fucking per chapter. And they'll show that, and a lot of people look for that because they're I don't want to read something that's only 8 sentences long. That's stupid. So they do that to pad out the page length. And I know, again, the next thought you have is, well, okay, so they wrote their own lyrics. It's they're not usually their lyrics. It's a lot of and then, Yusuke and Tasakara had a song battle, and here's this song by Breaking Benjamin that I really like, and it's just all the fucking lyrics to one of their songs. And it's that, sometimes interspaced with totes cool things they're doing while, music is playing. And it's just that. So we don't have that, but this is the time in which that came out. This is a time where that was starting to become a thing. And there are still people who do that, and it is the most infuriating thing, because it's absolutely just... You could have just put a giant blank space. It's really just that. You could have just left a whole fucking blank page. It would have had the exact same fucking impact. So at least, Greg didn't do that. But it does feel heavily as if it was something that would have been written on one of those websites. And it's, again, this is yet another thing with, we have our, little emo couple, and now everything feels like it's being written on fanfiction.net, and it's just oh, God, you're just so adorable. This is just the cutest little, time capsule, or, it hasn't gotten me angry, or upset or crazy or anything like that. Right now, it's just kind of just oh, you gosh darn emo kids, look at you. Uh, so, again, this is only the third chapter, so we may see more in the future, but yeah, so far this is not the worst thing I've ever read, and it is definitely a breath of fresh air as compared to the last book. So that's pretty much the end of this episode. Thank you all for watching. I'm sorry I'm not being more entertaining. I'm really trying my best, but it's really hard to get mad at just, basic fluff. And it's not happening yet. I'm sorry. I'll see you in the next episode, though. I love you. Goodbye.